The premier progressive metal festival in the United States is the festival down in Atlanta, Georgia, Prog Power Festival. I believe they have 1,200 to 1,300 seats at their venue, but they've been around in around the same time that our festival has been around. I would have to say that our festival is probably one of the most prestigious events of its kind, with the Northeast Art Rock Festival in Allentown, Pennsylvania, called NearFest. Another festival that just took a one-year sabbatical called Three Rivers Progressive Rock Festival in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In Montreal, Canada, there's another festival called the FMPM Festival. They just decided to terminate their festival after 6 years or 5 years. There's another festival in Quebec. It's an avant-garde festival. There's CalProg, but there's constantly rotation of prog shows in the United States. You know, the Flower Kings tour, Spock Spirit tours. Riverside's going to be going on tour, and the bigger bands are still touring. Renaissance, of course.
How have you managed to rally the support of the people? And perhaps you'd like to give us an insight into how you put it together initially, whether it's mainly your financial backing and your effort, or were other people part of the making of ROSfest?
Honestly, I was self-taught. It's a very harsh business. If you're going to enter into this business, you better learn how to lose money. To enter this business, you better know what you're doing, because you just can't get a band and play on stage. There's a lot of production that goes on. Inclusive with that is backline, which is the equipment that the bands have to use to play. Other things that are very important with that is lighting and sound. To have a good production manager, plus stage crew. And plus, when you take a responsibility of having a band come and play for you, you also take the responsibility of housing them, sometimes feeding them, making sure that everything works like clockwork. That's one of the things that ROSfest has been very proud to say, that we've been one of the best as far as having each band on stage, on time.
The initial financial backing, was that all of your own?
It was all my own. I had a partner, his name was Tom Smith, and in the beginning when we first started to do this, I was already doing smaller shows.
How did you manage to get all these bands to play? I can imagine it must be difficult to have to pay everything and everybody.
The biggest expense for bands is travel. Most bands want the exposure. They definitely want to sell their music. When they come to a festival, they can make a lot of money from selling their CDs. Obviously, the headliners are the ones that are going to get paid, because they're your bread and butter, and they pull in the crowds. Warm-up bands, they just want to have their travel costs covered. We try our best to fulfill that, and plus we house them.
How did you get your first headliner band to play for you, not having a track record?
I have a website called progforyu.com. And at the time, I was getting a lot of music for reviews. I was able to get contacts through that site. And I just basically said, you know, look, I'm putting a festival together, and I was wondering if you guys would like to play. Their question was, how much do you have? This is our budget. This is what we can offer you, and would you like to play? The bands that I liked were the bands that I had at the very first festival. And it was at the Colonial Theater in a little place called Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, and we had the bands actually play on 5.1 surround sound.
It cost you a fortune to put it all together.
Well, let's put it this way. The first year the budget was small.
Yeah.
The second year the budget got bigger, and then bigger.
Did you encounter any problems having bands from outside America enter on some kind of performance visa or work permit?
And I tell this to a lot of promoters, because the one thing you don't want to do is lose a band in customs. So every one of our bands that comes to the United States has permits to. Because if you try to sneak a band over, you might be able to get them through, but if they get red flagged and they find out that the promoter did it, I believe there's a $25,000 fine, and you can lose your business.
You ever kind of like join forces with the other festival organizers to bring in a band? You share resources and you get them in on one fee, and they actually accomplish a bit more in terms of the performance circuit.
Unfortunately, there's basically a month and a half between the festivals, and that would be a long tour. It's actually a good idea, though, I mean, to maybe get a bunch of promoters together, say Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, Washington, Rochester, New York, to bring over, say, a very big band and share the costs.
We're in the basement of your home.
Yeah. I call it my studio.
Your studio, where you are broadcasting live through your radio show every Friday.
Right.
And you have a chat situation set up as well, is that correct?
That's correct, right. You know, but it's a small show. I do it because it's a hobby, and it's just another tool to get the music out there.
There are quite a few prog rock and prog metal bands in Southeast Asia. It's quite interesting how similar in terms of how under the ground it is around the world. You know?
I constantly turn people on to progressive rock, and the first time they listen to it, they go, "My God, you know, such long songs." Everything you hear on the radio is a 3-minute track or less, and there's not much to it. But you just don't adapt to overnight. I think once you get the bug, you can't get away from it.
There's a resurgence of prog music in Southeast Asia. Do you think perhaps people are coming to an appreciation of the fact that they've just had enough of the same old, and they want a different experience that is dynamic, bold, and energetic, and, if I may use the word, artistic in many ways,
Yes.
than the same kind of a cookie-cutter style?
Yeah. There are a lot of bands right now categorized in the mainstream as being progressive rock, with elements of progressive rock. For example, band 3, Coheed and Cambria, Muse, even Radiohead, The Frontier, Mars Volta is one of them. There's a lot of bands right now that, you know, Porcupine Tree broke over, that are breaking those barriers. A lot of prog metal bands are starting to make breakthroughs too. Dream Theater's always been one of those names that's always been out there, and they're doing their best to qualify this music to the masses by doing a festival of their own, bringing bands that no one's ever heard of.
What made you interested in progressive music?
In the early 80s, when MTV used to play music, there was a band called Marillion. They're still around today, but with their former lead singer, Fish. Shueh-li was one of the songs that I remember seeing, and that was one of the bands that actually opened up a lot of progressive rock doors for me. For a lot of people, it would have been Genesis or Yes. Rush, of course, Kansas, Jethro Tull. There was a band called Oceanside from the United Kingdom. I got a CD from Costa Rica. Who'd ever thought that there would be a progressive rock band from Costa Rica?
What do you think is the hotbed for progressive music?
It would have to be Scandinavian. The UK, Germany, even France. You know, the thing about France is that they all sing in their native language, which we have no problem with that. We had a band from France last year called Lazuli. Took 2 songs for the crowd to warm up to them, but they ended up getting 5 standing ovations at the end.
Well, I notice a lot of European countries like to have English singing bands.
Yes.
They embrace bands singing in the English language, even if they don't understand the language.
That's why we were willing to take the risk, a band like Lazuli. I figured the music was strong enough to carry the band.
Because you're talking about, you know, the long hair being more predominantly a prog metal scene.
Right.
Than the prog rock scene, but then you know, a lot of people might not quite be able to differentiate the styles unless they see a visual distinction.
I think the toughest thing in prog today is, you know, bands trying to find their own identifiable sound. Writers are probably the worst critics. I think that the writers themselves are the ones that are making the comparison between the bands and what they're used to listening to, rather than listen to the worthiness of the band's music. I think a lot of these bands are trying to be like anybody else. It's easy to say, well, I was influenced by this band and that band and this band, but I think a lot of bands try to find their own sound. Riverside's one of those bands that when you hear Riverside, you know it's Riverside.
Have you had any bands out there who have utilized traditional or maybe folk instruments?
A band from Sweden called Ritual. They used a lot of native instruments that were folky instruments from their own country. A nickel harpa. It's a real funky instrument. You play with a bow, and it has keys on it. Plus they also had the mandolin, fiddle, strange pipes, and some strange drums. Iona from the United Kingdom also uses traditional instruments, something called Aurelian pipes. Plus they also use a lot of flutes and pan flutes. And
thank you so much for your time.
I want to just thank you so much for taking time to come out
all the way out here.
All the way out here to interview me. Someday maybe we can bring in a band that can represent your side of the world.